God bless you. I am Apostle Tony Golphin Hill, Senior Pastor and Spiritual Life Builder here at the Empowering Word Kingdom Ministries International. I want to thank you for taking time to view this short little sermon I want to talk about today. Today I want to talk about kind of a different subject, and I want to warn you now that the subject we're going to talk about is definitely rated God. Today we will be talking about Genesis chapter 17. Our subject is the penis covenant. Genesis chapter 17 today, our subject is the penis covenant. Today we're going to be talking about the circumcision covenant. Here in Genesis chapter 17, you will find out that God makes a specific covenant with Abraham. Here in this same chapter, we find that God literally changes his name from Abram to Abraham. We also find that in chapter 16, there are some things that happen that's kind of getting Abram prepared for the promise. There are some things that happen that's getting him prepared for the name change. And one of the things that we find in chapter 17, we find that God tells now Abraham, listen, I'm going to make a covenant with you. I'm going to make a covenant with you, and this covenant that I make is going to be called the circumcision covenant. Not only am I making a covenant with you, but I'm making a covenant with you, your children, and your children's children. The covenant that I make with you, we can call this a multi-generational covenant. Meaning that this covenant in Abraham just does not cover you, but this covenant covers your children, your children's children, and all those that come down your bloodline. That's why in the Bible days, especially in the Old Testament times, covenants are so important because God lived and God honored his covenant. So today we talk about the circumcision covenant. Circumcision in the Bible times was extremely significant. It was a mark on a man's body that signified that he was in covenant. It was a mark on a man's body that signified that he was in covenant. Understand something. God said that in Genesis chapter 17, he says, literally, he says, I'm going to make a covenant with your penis. Well, preacher, what do you mean? It's right there in the book. Take a few moments and read the entire chapter of Genesis chapter 17. We find that, and I want you to understand that the male reproductive organ represents the capacity to procreate. The male reproductive organs for a male represents his capacity to have children. It represents his capacity to procreate. Understand something. That's why God talked about the marriage and how the marriage was a covenant. Because when a man and woman got together in marriage to have children, it was to further the generational bloodline. See, back in the Bible days, they had children for specific purposes and for specific reasons. Understand this, that for a woman in Bible days, for a woman in Bible times, barrenness was a curse. The greatest curse to a woman in the Bible days was barrenness. So here in chapter 17, we find, so God decided, right in chapter 17 with Abraham, God decided that on the part of the man's body that brings him the greatest pleasure and his most important blessing. Well, what do you mean by that? It was a blessing for a man to have children. It was his legacy. It was how he carried his name on. It was his number one goal was to have children, to carry on the bloodline, to carry on the blessing. So right here in this text, God says, I'm going to make a covenant with the thing that brings you the greatest pleasure, and it is your most important blessing. He said, and not only that, but I will put a mark, there will be a mark on that part of your body, the penis, indicating, Abraham, that you are in covenant. Oh, that's just so important. Why would God, out of all the places on a man's body, out of all that God could do, why would God make a covenant with the man's penis? Because God says that this is Abraham, this is how you will flow. This is how you will replenish the earth. This is how you will become the father of many nations. So now God says, with the same thing that you use to produce life, to produce my covenant, I'm going to bless it. Oh, that's so very important. So what God was saying was that it's all about the covenant. Genesis chapter 17, he's saying it is all about the covenant. That's why in 1 Samuel, you find 1 Samuel chapter 17, we find the familiar story of David and Goliath, and we know the story. It's such a familiar story because keep in mind that it's all about the covenant. David and Goliath, such a familiar story. We find that Goliath was on one side of the valley, and the children of Israel, which is God's covenant people, are on another side of the valley. We find that Goliath on one side is now insulting. He's hurling insults. He's defying God. He's defying the armies of God. He has instilled fear in everybody's heart to the point that nobody wants to come out and fight with him. Well, by the time David's father sends him down there to take some food for his brothers, you guys know the story. David hears what Goliath is saying. See, the other people that were there, all his brothers and all the people of Israel, they were more concerned about the size of Goliath. History tells us that Goliath was probably about 9 feet tall, about 10 feet tall. So they were literally looking at his size. They were listening to what he was saying. They began to get afraid. But when David comes on the scene, David understands something that the rest of them does not understand. So look at this text. David said, listen, he asked them a question. He says, listen, what will you do for the person that goes out and takes care of this guy? What are you going to do for me? But then David asks another very important question. He says, who is this uncircumcised, watch it, here we go, who is this uncircumcised Philistine? That's important because why did he have to put that word in there? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine? Let me tell you what David understands covenant theology. David is not talking about here when he says, who is this uncircumcised Philistine? He's not talking about the anatomy. He's not talking about the mark that's there. But David is talking about covenant. What David is saying in this scripture is, he says, listen, that joker over there might be 9 feet tall. He might be a big giant. He might have a history of battle. But what I need to understand is that how are you guys letting someone who is not in covenant, oh, there it is right there, who is not in covenant, threaten some of us who are in covenant? David was saying, listen, he's not in covenant, but I am in covenant. And there is no way possible. See, David understood that there was a blessing to the covenant. It's all about the covenant. And when we begin as people of God to understand that we even today float and operate under that same covenant, then we should not allow people to defy what God can do. There are many times we go through things and things may seem a little hard and a little rough for you, but today in my closing, I want to tell you, remember the promise. And every time something comes up against you, or the enemy comes up against you, you got to say what David said. He said, listen, who is this out of covenant person? When things happen in your life, ask the question, what are these out of covenant circumstances coming up against me? Those things are out of covenant. I am in covenant. Why? Because my God is a covenant keeping God. Remember this. If you remember nothing else, it's all about the covenant. Men, says to the men today, God made a covenant with your penis. The mark that you will find that God says, as you have children, as you procreate, I'm blessing you and I'm blessing what comes out of you. This is Apostle Tony Garfield Hill from the Empowerment Word Kingdom Ministries International, where the worship is intense, the love is immense, and the word makes sense. Come on, go to our website. You'll find it right there on the screen. I'll be looking for you on that website. Will you be looking for me? God bless you, and I will see you soon.